Hello and welcome to Undivided. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your commitment to giving common sense a comeback. I'm Brandi Kruse. Coming up on the show today, we're going to talk about some very obvious qualities that an elected leader should have. Honesty being one of them, transparency being another one of them, and two concerns I have about two different candidates and them seeming to fall short in that regard when it comes to their campaigns for the governor's office. Also, remember the trans woman who filed a complaint against a traditional Korean spa in Washington state saying that she was denied access to the spa? Well, that individual now wants more privacy for people who file complaints like the one that she filed with the Human Rights Commission in Washington state. And is Portland suddenly going from woke to awake? Is Portland less woke than Seattle now? Portland making a very obvious decision to reverse course on quote-unquote harm reduction strategies when it comes to drug users. To me, this is just plain common sense. To see Portland do it is a great thing. Now, if only Seattle would fall in line. We'll get to all of that coming up momentarily. But first, if you have not become a subscriber to the show already, please do so. It's how we continue to do this show full time and bring you the great 4 live episodes every single week. If you're a subscriber, in addition to those live episodes, you also get access to Sundays with Subscribers, our exclusive Sunday show. For those of you who support the show financially, undividedpod.com, undividedpod.com. It's just as little as $5 a month. All right, let's start with Attorney General Bob Ferguson, who, of course, is the, I would say, front runner to be the next governor of Washington state. He is certainly considered by a lot of Democrats to be the heir apparent to the job. But I will say Bob Ferguson has a problem with transparency, and this has been an issue for some time. You know, and I also blame Bob Ferguson when it comes to state lawmakers who have just exhausted efforts to hide their records. If Bob Ferguson were to speak out about that, if he were to take a forceful position to say, no, we need to be more transparent to the people we serve, I don't think that we would have these repeated efforts now, in particular from Democrats in Olympia, to hide records from the public. And Bob Ferguson, when it comes to his campaign, there are now complaints about how he's handling excess campaign contributions. So just to set this up for you, because it gets a little insidery baseball, but basically he had excess campaign funds that he had when he ran for attorney general. And so now that he's decided to run for governor, he's taken a good bulk of those and transitioned them over to his account for the governor's race. And you might think, well, what's the big deal? You know, he's allowed to do that. But the question is, does he now have to be transparent with where that money came from, specifically the individual donors from the money he transferred from one account into his campaign for governor? That is the subject of a couple complaints against Bob Ferguson. This is from the Washington State Standard. Complaint pushes for Ferguson to reveal donors of $1.2 million in campaign transfers. So when Bob Ferguson started moving campaign funds from his attorney general fund into his fund for the governor's race, there was this ongoing conversation about and really challenging that actually came from Hillary Franz, who's a Democratic opponent of Bob Ferguson. She wanted more rules over that because she's like, oh, this guy's got like a war chest. And if I can make it harder for him to move that old war chest into the new campaign, then it's better for me. And so the Public Disclosure Commission did end up putting more restrictions on the transparency involved in moving those funds. But after Bob Ferguson had already moved a bunch of it, according to the Washington Standard, on April 27th, commissioners considered a request from an attorney who had filed a complaint over this to require greater disclosure. And on May 11th, they approved new guidance requiring candidates to identify the donors and treat their contributions as if they are for the candidate's new campaign, making them subject to disclosure and contribution limits for the race. And since Ferguson had already by then moved $1.18 million transferred over from his old campaign to his new campaign, they are basically saying we did those transfers before the complaint and before the PDC's new rules. And so we, moving forward, will be more, we'll follow the new guidelines and the new regulations when it comes to old money moved over to a new campaign account. But the question is, should he go above and beyond? Should Bob Ferguson say, we weren't required to disclose who these funds were from when we initially made the transfers, but in the interest of transparency, we're going to do it anyway. And I think that given Bob Ferguson's poor track record with transparency, he ought to do it anyway. Need I remind you that his office just recently was hit with a massive fine, and by his office, I mean, of course, Washington taxpayers, hit with a massive fine because of what a judge called egregious violations of failing to disclose documents. This is the Seattle Times article from the time. Law judge orders AG's office, DSHS, to pay more for withholding evidence. So basically, DSHS in the state of Washington were being sued as it related to the care of a developmentally disabled woman. And through that lawsuit, the AG's office was required to disclose any pertinent documents. And they withheld thousands of pages of documents and emails that were directly relevant to that case. And Bob Ferguson, I'll give the mainstream media credit, he was raked over the coals for that. And so despite that, despite his poor track record with transparency, he's now seeming to say with these old campaign contributions that, we'll do better next time when it comes to transparency. And I just have to wonder, why is he not more concerned about being transparent? He's already had that. It's a big knock on his record. Is he that confident that you won't care, that voters in Washington state won't care, that he has a track record of trying to hide things from the people he serves and from the voters? And, just an explanation as to why the whole transfer thing matters. Individuals are limited for how much they can contribute to a political campaign. So what it does when let's say I am Bob Smith of Seattle and I want to max out for Bob Ferguson. I can contribute now to his gubernatorial campaign and max out. And if my campaign contributions from his AG run were part of those excess surplus funds transferred over, well, technically I, Bob Smith, have contributed more to Bob Ferguson's campaign than I'm technically allowed to in any given campaign cycle. But because there isn't that required transparency of the old funds when he moved it over, then we'll never know. And so I would challenge Bob Ferguson, if you care to learn lessons from the past, if you want to actually prove to voters that you care about what I think is one of the most important things for any public servant, if you want to say you care about transparency, I would say do this, even though you're not required to yet. Do this for those old excess campaign contributions and show us that you indeed are learning a lesson and you want to be more transparent to the people that you serve. All right, so again, I said that today we're going to talk about two things I think are really important as we elect the next governor of Washington state, one being the lack of transparency issue, and the other one being honesty. Honesty is important in any campaign, but I would argue even more so when it comes to who is going to be the next governor of the state. And one of the real disappointing things I've seen, frankly, from both sides when it comes to elections is the level of gaslighting is out of control. It's out of control. Throwing claims out there, throwing comments out there that aren't accurate. Maybe they're not a bold-faced lie, but they're meant to mislead and gaslight. And just hoping that whoever comes across those comments and statements, they'll just buy it hook, line, and sinker. They won't dig into it any further. That's why I always tell you guys, when you get the campaign literature, just throw it in the garbage. Because 99% of it is misleading statements intended to gaslight. So I'll say, Hillary Franz is the Commissioner of Public Lands. I like Hillary a lot. I've met Hillary many, many times, particularly out at wildfires throughout the years as a journalist. And I've heard great things about Hillary, especially on the east side of the state, where they appreciate that she has shown up when they need her. And so, when it comes to the governor's race, there are several Democrats in the race who I think would be miles better than Bob Ferguson. Hillary Franz being one of them, Mark Mullet being the other. I would take either of them over Bob Ferguson, which is why I was incredibly disappointed to see this tweet from Hillary Franz. So it came after Dave Reichert entered the race for governor. And I got to be honest, this doesn't even sound like her. She wrote, as a congressman, Dave Reichert voted in line with Trump 92.5% of the time, including taking extreme anti-choice positions. He's out of touch with Washington. She goes on to write, I don't think that kind of right-wing record is what Washington voters are looking for. More so, Dave Reichert has repeatedly taken extremist anti-choice positions throughout his long career in politics, including voting to criminalize abortion. So what I really take issue with in this is, first of all, when she says, or whoever freaking wrote this tweet on her account, who I think she should fire, when she says Dave Reichert voted in line with Trump 92.5% of the time. Donald Trump, when he was president, didn't vote for anything. He signed bills into law, certainly. But it's very common, and you would see the exact same thing, for instance, when Jesse Jensen was running for Congress in the 8th Congressional District. He would send out these flyers saying Kim Schreier had like 100% voting record with Nancy Pelosi or with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And it's like, okay, first of all, Nancy Pelosi hardly ever votes. And when you are a member of Congress of the same party as someone, there's a good chance that you're going to have a pretty high percentage voting record with that person. That's very normal. In fact, the vast majority of things that Congress votes on are bipartisan. It's just a small percentage of things that are divisive and that you'd see a split along party lines. So this is something that I have called out the right for doing, and that I'm going to call out Hillary Franz for doing. Saying as a congressman, Dave Reichert voted in line with Trump 92.5% of the time doesn't mean anything, not to mention that Dave Reichert only overlapped as a congressman for 2 years with Donald Trump's presidency. 2 years. Furthermore, Dave Reichert, when he left Congress, and even when he was still in Congress, he was clear that he didn't particularly like Donald Trump. He didn't like Donald Trump's rhetoric, and he was outspoken about that. And so for Hillary Franz to call and to use that lazy right-wing label, for the love of God, anybody who knows anything about Dave Reichert, he is not right-wing. And when you call, it's like when you call everything racist. And then it's like, okay, when something's actually racist, it kind of loses its steam. Same thing with right-wing. Are there right-wing people? Of course. Is Dave Reichert one of them? No, Hillary Franz, he's not. And she knows that. And I responded to her on Twitter. I said, this is disappointing. This doesn't even sound like you. And I would really hope that Hillary Franz, that Mark Mullet, they can rise above that really lazy style of political campaigning where you just gaslight and fearmonger. And as an example for why I think it's unfair and ridiculous for Hillary Franz to dive in on Dave Reichert and say, and act like he's right-wing pro-Trump, I pulled clips from 2 interviews that I did when I was at Fox 13 with Dave Reichert, one in 2018, when he was still a member of Congress, and one in 2019, just after he'd retired from Congress. And in both of them, long before he had any ambition or plan to run for governor, he was being clear about his belief that the right wing and the left wing were destroying our country, that he wanted people to treat each other with more respect, and that he didn't particularly like Donald Trump's bomb throwing. Here are those clips.
The problem is that we've gotten to a point where you have the far left and the far right, and those are the voices that you hear. The rest of us who are here, operating here, and the majority of Americans are here, I do get a little bit frustrated with the loud voices. We need to begin to teach our kids at home and at school to respect each other. I don't care, it doesn't matter if it's about color, if it's about education, if it's about your religion. It doesn't matter. None of that matters. We're all human beings, and we need to respect each other.
How do you convince them to respect one another when the most powerful person in the country has had a heck of a time showing respect for people?
But it's like you can't use that as an excuse. Well, the president acts that way, or the congressman acts this way, my parents act this way. And it's sort of like I grew up in a home with domestic violence. So does that mean that if I am in a home now that where I'm the father and we have domestic violence, I can blame it on somebody else and say, well, my parents were acting that way when I was at home, and I ran away from home when I was a senior in high school. So does that mean I have an excuse now that I don't have accountability, that I don't have responsibility? No, I'm an adult. And I can make those decisions. Is it hard to change and break that cycle? Yes. But you have your own life, you make your own decisions, and you can make a difference. The bomb throwers are the divisive people, I think, in our communities, and the more bombs that are thrown, the more people are sort of divided, along party lines, and it's disappointing because I think we're going to blow up internally. We will destroy ourselves if we continue down the path that we're headed down.
Well, I feel like I have to bring up the president at this point. We've talked about the president, and I believe that the conversation we had before you left office was that you don't like a lot of the things that he says. Now that you're removed from actually having to be in D.C. and work with all these people, I want to ask you whether you think the president should be reelected.
That's up to the voters again. I've sort of laid out to you what I'm looking for.
Well, you're talking about, the bomb throwers being bad for our country. I don't know that there's a bigger bomb thrower.
I don't like bullies. I don't like to call, name calling. I don't like it when people degrade each other. I think it's all wrong.
Yeah. And so when you hear that, and I'm so glad I could find those, because all my recollections of interviews with Dave Reichert for all the years I've been in Seattle have always been someone who is incredibly reasonable, who doesn't make excuses for someone just because they're a member of his own political party. And so to see someone I respect, Hillary Franz, who I really like personally, come out with that lazy style of campaigning right off the bat, trying to fearmonger people with that Trump label, right-wing label about Dave Reichert. It's like, come on, would you ever show those interviews of Dave Reichert where he's being this really reasonable, rational person who just wants everyone to get along and wants politicians to work for the benefit of the people they serve? It's like, it's night and day from how he's being painted and how he is going to continue to be painted. I hope, though, Hillary, and we've invited both Bob Ferguson on the show and Hillary Franz on the show, and we haven't been able to book anything with either of them yet, right, Nicole? Yeah.
I have not got a response from either.
Yeah, and Hillary texted me briefly and basically said, we've been really busy traveling all around, but,
We'll see.
if this is the direction she's trying to take her campaign, my free advice to Hillary Franz would be trying to out progressive Bob Ferguson trying to act like you dislike Trump more than Bob Ferguson. It's just not going to get you anywhere. I mean, he's got the market cornered on that. He's got the market corner on the anti-Trump crowd, on the far left crowd. And so, Hillary to me is someone who, since I've known her all these years and in the work she's done for Eastern Washington communities as a Democrat and as the Commissioner of Public Lands, I think leaning into that and leaning into being a bridge builder and not vilifying Republicans and using the lazy right-wing Trump antics, I think that would have been a much better path for her. I don't know who's advising her to go down this path. I think it's disappointing. I would fire them. I mean, I go back to when she put out, a couple months before she announced her gubernatorial campaign, she put out this press release from the DNR account where she was commenting on the indictment of Donald Trump in Manhattan. And it was a win for the rule of law. And it's like, first of all, you're the Commissioner of Public Lands. Why are you putting out, it was because she was prepping to run for governor and wanted to prove to voters, I hate Trump too. It's the wrong path to go down. It's super lazy. Leave the lazy, cheap shots to Bob Ferguson. Okay, we are going to, by the way, when it comes to the gubernatorial race, I wanted you to hear from a couple people who are directly impacted by Dave Reichert's decision to run as a Republican. One of them is Dr. Raul Garcia, a Republican who was running, who has now decided that he is going to drop out of the race and run for U.S. Senate. We're going to have a clip from a conversation I taped with him. Also, a clip from a conversation we taped that we're going to post later on with State Senator Mark Mullet, the moderate Democrat in the race, and whether Dave Reichert's entry hurts his chances of winning. So we'll get to that coming up in a little bit. I wanted to, we were going to do this on the show yesterday and we were just too jam-packed, so I wanted to fit it in today. We've been talking about Seattle and the MLB All-Star Game and these little walking paths they created from the downtown center, Pike Place Market, et cetera, all the way down kind of along the waterfront to the stadiums, which is kind of a jaunt. I mean, you can do it if you're in good shape, but I would say that there's some people who'd probably prefer to take the train or take the bus because it's not super close. So I was wondering, why are you seeing the promotion of, especially given some of the quality of life issues and the drug use and the safety issues, why are you seeing them promote people walking on these walking paths and not taking light rail, not taking the bus? Like, we love public transit in Seattle. Why wouldn't you encourage out-of-town visitors to do those things? And I tend to think it's because the buses are in horrendous order with people. I mean, I heard our friend Jason Rance takes the buses all the time, and he always sees drug users and stuff. And so I tend to think it's a safety reason. But our friend Ari Hoffman over at KVI posted a terrifying alert that he got his hands on that went out to light rail operators. It says, operator alert, individuals accessing operating cabs. It says unauthorized individuals have been seen accessing the non-operating cabs of in-service and terminal trains. If you suspect someone has entered an operating cab, contact LCC at once. Do not confront anyone nor block the exit of a person fleeing an operating cab. Please provide us with your observations, a description of the person or persons involved, and be prepared to follow instructions from rail supervisory personnel. Watch out for people who have hid in non-operating cabs of returning trains. And why Ari Hoffman points out that this is so concerning, he says that a Sound Transit employee told him that someone could induce an emergency stop or disable the train's propulsion system or jam the radio system wide from inside one of those non-operating cabs. So it doesn't have to be the cab that you actually have, the conductor of the train in. It could be one that's elsewhere on the train that's not being actively utilized. He also says that he was told by a Sound Transit employee that despite Homeland Security concerns, the control keys were wired in the cabs next to the controller, and someone could steal a train from a terminal or a yard. So that's great. Of all the concerns we have with the MLB All-Star Game, stolen Sound Transit trains, add that to the list. But I have to wonder, truly, I don't wonder, I kind of know, why they're not encouraging public transportation. I have to believe it's because of the dangers associated with the bus system, and the same as light rail. I mean, the couple times I've been on light rail, one time this guy went on some weird racist tirade. He was clearly having a mental health emergency. The other time I saw someone actively using drugs. So I just don't think it's the way you want to show Seattle off to the rest of the nation. But hey, get out of your cars, people, and take public transportation. Things are just fine. All right, coming up next, we will hear from State Senator Mark Mullet and Raul Garcia, now a candidate for U.S. Senate, not the governor's office. But first, I've been telling you guys about what I think is a good opportunity to save a little cash, especially considering the cost of gasoline, the new long-term care payroll deduction that you're going to just start to see come out of your paycheck, and that is the First Mark Challenge. So Mike and I, we are now members of the First Mark family. We took the First Mark Challenge a few months ago. They came in, they assessed all our current insurance, talked to us about our insurance needs, went out and shopped the market for us at no cost to us. It didn't cost us a dime to take the First Mark Challenge. And then they came back to us. We ended up getting much better insurance for about the same price. And Dave Taylor, the CEO of First Mark, said that a lot of people, they find out, are woefully underinsured, and they think, well, gosh, I've got to spend a bunch of money to get better insurance. And that is not always the case.
So the risk is if you get in an auto accident and you don't have enough coverage, and let me clarify, you get in an auto accident that's your fault, and you don't have enough coverage, then they can come after you personally for any additional amounts over and above your coverage limit. And that means things like your retirement plan, or come after your equity in your home, or garnish your wages. So it's a big thing. And like with you and Mike, I just think most people haven't had someone take the time to explain it to them in terms they can understand, and show them the how inexpensive it is to actually get the correct coverage.
Yeah, and after going through that, I really think everyone should have an insurance broker. I thought it was like, Mike and I are like, oh gosh, we're not rich. Can we have an insurance broker? It didn't cost us anything. They went out and did all this work for us, came back to us. We have much better insurance for the same price. And I was mentioning about saving money earlier. We heard from a woman who said she took the First Mark Challenge. She's saving $100 a month and has better insurance than she had before, which is going to help her offset some of the increased costs around inflation, et cetera. So take the First Mark Challenge. Again, it's free to you. You learn a lot in the process, and you could end up saving hundreds or thousands of dollars a year. So firstmarkinsurance.com, firstmarkinsurance.com, they work for you. All right, we've taped some interviews with candidates in the last few days that we're planning to post on Patreon and Locals. So these will be up in the coming days. I think we're going to post the Mark Mullet one today, and ours with Dr. Raul Garcia tomorrow in full. But I wanted to play a clip from each of them on the live show today, because when Dave Reichert announced he was going to run for governor, I mean, nobody was really expecting that. People had wanted him to run before. He declined. He's like, I'm spending time with my grandkids. I really didn't think, and I think a lot of people in the political ecosystem did not believe that he would make a foray back into politics. And so the question is, how does that shake up the race, particularly for someone like Democrat Mark Mullet, state senator, very moderate Democrat, and he's been open that he was relying, and he said this when he launched his campaign, he needs there to be a robust Republican field in order to have a chance to win. Because what he basically is hoping for is that Republicans will split up the vote, and then it'll be a top 2 Democratic finish in the primary. So if it's Bob Ferguson and Senator Mark Mullet in the general election, Mark Mullet wins easily because he'll get all the Republican votes and then some moderate Democrat votes. So I had him in and I asked him how it impacts his campaign now that Dave Reichert's in the race. And he says that he is moving forward. And I think he's also subtly hoping that more Republicans decide to enter the race despite Dave Reichert's candidacy. Here he is.
The key is if you want to make progress on affordability, which means being more acknowledging that our taxes, especially this long-term care payroll tax, has gone overboard.
We'll get into that.
If you want to do better on public safety, you have to have somebody who can actually win. You have to be electable. And when you look at historically in our state for the last 2 decades, there hasn't been any pro-life candidates who've won statewide, none. The Republicans who did win statewide were actually pro-choice Republicans, not pro-life Republicans. So if you go back to Kim Wyman, Rob McKenna, Sam Reed, and so my point is, if you want to see progress on affordability, you want to see progress on public safety, you have to find a candidate who is electable. And that's my point. And I think when we get to the primary next summer, that's going to play in voters' minds.
Yes.
They want to see somebody who can actually win the governor's race and make progress on those issues.
So you think even though there's excitement around Dave Reichert, he's been sort of the unicorn Republicans have hoped to get, he's won in King County, he has name recognition, you think it'll be the same old thing, Republican and Democrat, and he would lose?
Oh my God, in the general election?
In a general election, you think there's no chance?
There is no chance. I mean, anyone who thinks, and when you look at the fact that we haven't had a pro-life Republican for the last 2 decades, that was before Roe v. Wade got overturned. And you don't have to do any polling, you just have to look at the elections in the 22 cycle. We saw, once it got overturned, we saw this huge swing in our state, in every race. And these are legislative races, they were statewide races, where it became very obvious that, yeah, Washington voters care about this issue, and that is what makes me electable in the general election. I think it's really important for everyone to factor that issue in.
Yeah, so it sounds like that's going to be Mark Mullet's real selling point moving forward. He thinks that even though it's Dave Reichert, who probably has as good of a chance as any Republican has had in recent years, voters still have not elected a Republican for the governor's office in 40 years. So it sounds like his sales pitch moving forward is going to be like, look, you can vote as Republicans for Dave Reichert, but if you do, he will lose and Bob Ferguson will be the next governor. And so that's kind of the theme and the narrative that he's going to continue his campaign with. The other person who was obviously impacted by Dave Reichert's decision to enter the race is Dr. Raul Garcia. So Dr. Raul Garcia ran for governor as a Republican in 2020, but he entered the race very late, did not make it past the primary election, but made it clear pretty early on that he wanted to run again in 2024. And so a couple months ago, he announced his candidacy, started campaigning, and then Dave Reichert entered the race. And look, I don't know all the conversations behind the scenes and whether there was strong encouragement for him to drop out, but he's decided now to support Dave Reichert's candidacy and to instead run for U.S. Senate against Democratic Senator Maria Cantwell. I had Raul Garcia again, and again, we'll post the full interview coming up here on Thursday. And I asked him, why he made the decision at the end of the day to bow out of a race that he'd already began, that he'd been planning for several years, and instead go the route of U.S. Senate.
It's not often the case that you get to make a decision that will either divide or unite people. And that's a decision that I think that I was faced with. Dave is a friend and a very accomplished leader in our state. 14 years as a congressman and an accomplished King County sheriff, and someone who actually shares a lot of the same ideologies with me. So, I was faced with a situation where I thought at the end that it was irresponsible for me fiscally, for the people that have donated to me and his donors for that matter, to get into a 12-round heavyweight dogfight with him and divide the party further and divide the state. And then at the end, have the very large possibility of Bob Ferguson having an easier time to win this election as governor. And that is not what we want at the end, not for us, not for anybody. So if we were to find a situation where we could help each other and run as a team, I thought that would be the best and the most ideal. And I spoke with Dave a couple of times, and he thought it was superbly gracious of me to come up with this, and made the decision to unite the party and hopefully set an example of team for the rest of leaders out there to follow along.
Yeah, and I am sure that those things factored in about saying, hey, how can we build a stronger ticket? Obviously, we're not both going to be able to make it past the primary, but also I think you have to look at just legitimate, can we win still? And I think the money for Dr. Garcia would have dried up pretty quick for the governor's race. So now he's going to switch, his focus to looking at some of these issues from the federal angle, and also some national issues like the border that really he wouldn't have probably talked a lot about in a campaign for governor. So we will have both a full interview with State Senator Mark Mullet and Dr. Raul Garcia, now a candidate for U.S. Senate, up on Patreon and Locals coming up here in the next couple days. So interesting happenings. He also, by the way, Semi Bird, there's still a question about, is Semi Bird going to stay in the race for governor, or is he going to bow out and run maybe for something else? I asked Dr. Raul Garcia if he wants Semi Bird to drop out, and he said yes, he thinks that would be the best thing. But whether that will happen, not so sure. All right, let us get to our segment, Unbelievable. We have an update on a previous Unbelievable segment for you today. All right, you guys will probably remember Haven Wilvich. Haven is a trans woman who filed a complaint with the Washington Human Rights Commission to say that she was being discriminated against because a traditional Korean spa, the Olympus Spa in Linwood, Washington, would not allow her, she claims, access to the spa because she has not undergone surgical interventions. And that's sort of the threshold, because Olympus Spa is an all-women's spa. You're allowed to be nude in there, etc. And it's kind of a traditional spa. And so they have rules around transgender people using the spa, and you have to have undergone a certain level of surgical interventions to actually change your gender before you're allowed into an area where there is naked women. So anyway, Haven is now speaking out in the media saying that she wants to change public disclosure laws because she's been harassed after this story came to light. Here is the article from King 5 News. Push to change public disclosure laws after trans woman's complaint leads to harassment and death threats. And look, I will state for the record, I mean, that's awful. You don't want anyone to get death threats or harassment. I have no doubt that she did. I'm sure there are some lunatic people on the internet who sent things to her, and she talked a little bit about that with King 5. Here's a clip of their story.
I found myself getting targeted with hundreds of hate messages and threats of violence.
The messages shared with us, incredibly vile, but Haven wants you to hear some of what she's received.
You'll never be a woman. Go kill yourself. Haven Wilvich is a predator. Hope karma comes for this disgusting, misogynistic pervert.
To Haven's surprise, her complaint to the Human Rights Commission ended up in court documents. The spa taking the commission to court because of its decision. That case was dismissed, but Haven's trouble had just started.
Transphobes on the internet were able to find my name in connection to this and are trying to place the blame for the change on me rather than on state law.
So here's the thing. So now she wants to go and say that if you file these complaints because of harassment with the Human Rights Commission, that your name can be protected. So if somebody files a public disclosure request, your name would be blacked out. Now, in principle, I don't necessarily disagree with that. I think it's a conversation that I'd be open to having with someone who wants to advocate for it. There are instances via public disclosure laws where certain private information can be withheld. And I certainly want someone to feel empowered if they're truly being discriminated against to file a complaint with whatever entity it is, in this case the Human Rights Commission, and feel like they can do that without then being targeted for further harassment. So I don't necessarily think it's an unreasonable request, but here's where I find this media tour from Haven Wilvich to be a little bit insincere, and her now push to change public disclosure requests a little unbelievable. Haven Wilvich was all over social media talking about this fight she was having with Olympus Spa before it ever hit the news. She was actively seeking attention for what she was doing with the Human Rights Commission. And I'll just give you an example of a couple things that Haven Wilvich put out before there were stories out there and this became a national talking point. I mean, insults against biological women. I realized something important today. I'm more woman than any TERF will ever be because I'm an intentional woman, whereas they are only incidental, which is just offensive. And then she posted after the Human Rights Commission sided with her, I did it. I worked with the Washington Human Rights Commission and got Olympus Spa, the main naked ladies spa in the area, to change their policies and allow all self-identified women access regardless of surgery and genitals. So she is putting herself out there as a martyr for this cause. And in doing so is insulting biological women. Calling us TERFs, people, transgender, exclusionary radical feminism. So this is someone who's never wanted to shy away from the spotlight, who wants to be seen as a martyr for this cause, who wants to have her face on it, who wants to have her story told. There's this, and I'm pretty sure it's run by her, a website all about, her experience and her journey. This is someone who wants and craves attention and actively goes to seek it. What she doesn't like is the response that attention seeking got her. Now, look, let's exclude from this conversation death threats and hate speech. It's inappropriate in any context. But I have to imagine that Haven Wilvich also didn't love a lot of the pushback that she got from reasonable people who said, look, there is a reason why some biological women might be uncomfortable. So if you're going to go after a business in this way, if you're going to file a complaint against them with the Human Rights Commission, if you're going to actively talk about that complaint on social media, and then you get backlash and you're like, oh, I want to change the laws so that I can hide my name from this, and anybody else who wants to file can hide their names. It's just disingenuous, and it's a little bit unbelievable that now she wants to put the toothpaste back in the tube. You're in this fight, and you chose that. Now, again, more than happy to have a legitimate conversation about whose name and identities should be protected when it comes to public disclosure requests. There's a lot of legitimate reasons why some things need to be blacked out when they're handed out to the general public. I totally understand that. I just don't think that Haven Wilvich is the poster child for that argument and that debate. All right, coming up next, we'll dip outside of Washington State and talk about Portland apparently being now the voice of reason and sanity when it comes to how West Coast cities should be responding to the drug crisis that their policies have helped to create. But first, we've been talking about our friend Wes Jones with sellwithwes.com. Him and his team have an innovative marketing strategy to make sure not only do the most possible eyeballs get on your listing, but also that your home is in tip-top shape when it hits the market. In fact, Nicole and I just chatted with a woman yesterday who had an awesome Wes Jones story. It was like getting ready to sell the home she'd lived in since 1997. And well, in fact, we'll play some of this coming up on the show next week, but was in a home she'd been in since 1997. Was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to get it. Somebody's going to buy it as a flip. I'm going to get no money for this house. Well, then she reached out to Wes Jones because she'd heard about him on our friend Dory Monson's show before he passed away. And Wes Jones and his team came in and they used their Listing Boost concierge service where they figure out everything that needs to be fixed with your home. They'll handle all of those projects and they can even front you the money up front. Here's Wes Jones.
So we're going to come in, number one, and we're going to inspect a home, do a pre-inspection. We're going to find out all those little hidden bugs that, a buyer may be concerned with. And if a seller wants to do some cosmetic updates, whether it's flooring, whether it's lighting, countertops, even a kitchen, we're going to help guide them through that. So the Listing Boost Concierge Service, what we can do is we can project manage those rehab projects. We have a list of contractors and preferred vendors that we like to work with and have a ton of experience with. And we'll take that off a seller's hands. We'll go ahead and run that project for them. And we even have some options where they can pay at closing out of their net proceeds.
Yeah, I mean, talk about taking the stress of the home selling process. I mean, when I spoke to this woman, she's like, they took care of everything involved with getting the home ready to sell. So sellwithwes.com, sellwithwes.com. Check them out. A better way to sell your home. Okay, let's dip outside of Washington State for a moment, shall we? We're not going too far today, just down to Portland. Portland, and actually it's the county that it's I'm gonna butcher. I've never been able to say this county. Multnomah.
Hey, I'm not going to judge because I'd probably do the same.
I also said Oregon for a long time because that's how we said it in Minnesota.
Yeah.
Like it was the Oregon Trail.
That gives you away.
So now I've said Oregon for many years now, but Multnomah, I'm sure somebody will correct me. So anyway, Multnomah County has suspended their plan to distribute quote unquote harm reduction, which I just take issue with that word in general. But things like tinfoil, for instance, items to help you use drugs, and they call it harm reduction. Here's the article from K2, Channel 2. Multnomah County suspends plan to distribute tinfoil straws to drug users in the Portland area. Here's their story with Portland Mayor Ted Wheeler.
Our primary mission is to, save lives and to build bridges to better health outcomes. I know it's a disconcerting situation that we're seeing, not just in Portland, but across the nation.
Portland Mayor Ted Wheeler strongly opposed the now suspended plan, saying it would bring more people to the area to do drugs like fentanyl. He says the public overwhelmingly wants more treatment.
This is a hell of a way to build a bridge to somebody who is vulnerable on our streets by addicting them further to fentanyl, which is a deadly substance. If you want to build bridges, get out of your clinic, get out of your office, and go out into the community.
Now look, I agree, Ted Wheeler. However, I still have a hard time taking Ted Wheeler seriously. I've had a hard time taking Ted Wheeler seriously ever since the summer of 2020, when he was just allowing an absolute free-for-all with rioters on the streets of Portland and making excuses left, right, and center for them until, didn't they firebomb his home or something? They came to his house and he still wasn't actively condemning them. So I'm sorry. I don't feel particularly bad for Mayor Ted Wheeler in the state of his city. However, if anyone wants to come around to the side of sanity, even Ted Wheeler, if Shama Sawant came in tomorrow and was like, I changed my mind on police defunding, I'd be like, welcome to the side of sanity. So Ted Wheeler, I don't know if this is a permanent come to Jesus moment for you. I sure hope so. But I also think that this is just a no-brainer. And again, there are some harm reduction things that I think are true harm reduction. Naloxone, Narcan, that's one of them. If you are a paramedic and you're called to an overdose and you can save that person's life on the spot to give them a chance to turn their lives around and become productive members of society, I don't believe in the people are like, let them die, natural selection. I think that's awful. And I have personally interviewed people who have been revived with Narcan and then went on to live happy, productive, healthy lives and have children and all of that. So, but when it comes to needles, when it comes to bump kits or whatever and tinfoil, our friend Kevin Dahlgren, who used to be with We Heart Seattle, I'll never forget this video clip he took of him down in San Francisco in the Tenderloin. And there was this quote unquote safe injection, safe use site. And it's supposed to be a place where you come in, they give you this little paper bag full of stuff that you can use to do drugs, but they also connect you to services. And that was your inroad to get connected to services. He walked in that place, not a drug user, but just to see, gets handed this paper bag full of all sorts of stuff for him to use drugs in a harm reduction manner. There wasn't a single person working there besides the person at the front who gave him the paper bag. There was no one in there offering him services or access to counseling or substance abuse or anything like that. So, and I think, unfortunately, that's what a lot of these harm reduction things do. It's give us your dirty needles, we'll get rid of them, and then here are some clean needles, continue to shoot up that fentanyl that's probably going to kill you. That is not harm reduction. Kudos to Portland and Multnomah County, somebody in the comments is probably giving me Multnomah County for realizing that before Seattle and King County, but hopefully sanity's on the horizon and we're not too far away. So maybe they'll see good results with that when it comes to because the argument with harm reduction is if we don't do this, more people will die. Well, okay, but if you continue to do it, I think more people will die too. Just because you have a clean needle doesn't mean that fentanyl's not going to kill you. Stupid. Okay, let's move on to the 2024 presidential race. I think DeSantis is kind of floundering a little bit.
I think a lot of it.
A lot of it, which is sort of surprising.
I know,
because
that's why it always worries me that they go in so early. It starts too early. Had you gone straight to an election 3 months after he announced, he probably would have done better.
Yeah, but there's this new poll from Florida Atlantic University, and they're saying in Florida, Trump has a 20-point lead over DeSantis among registered GOP voters when asked who they would support if the 2024 primary were held today. 50% said Trump, 30% said DeSantis, 7% said they were undecided. That's pretty staggering.
I think so.
That's pretty staggering because, I mean, obviously Ron DeSantis is the current governor of Florida, and he's very, very popular in Florida. And so for him to be that far down to Donald Trump, even in light of all the continued headlines around Trump and the documents and all of that.
And maybe that explains why. I think over here we're like, why is Trump still in it? Why is this even a thing? And then you see that and you're like, oh, he's seeing that.
Yeah.
And that's why he's still in it.
Well, and we're right. And look, I don't expect Trump to just drop out because I'm over here on my podcast saying, "Oh, you're bad for you're bad for elections in Washington State."
It feel like over here it feels like the atmosphere is different for him, and he doesn't have
well, of course, it doesn't just feel that way. It is that way. Yeah, we have our Republicans here are fairly moderate. This is a Florida poll.
Well, I'm saying it feels like the country has moved on, and there's just these really intense Trump fans that are still fighting for him, but it feels like the country has moved on, and this tells me, well, maybe they haven't.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are still enclaves of Trump support that's very strong, but I do think the more negative press and headlines around Trump, the more it just amps up that base. Mm-hmm. Look, DeSantis has disappointed me a lot. I would say if you'd asked me 2 months ago, I'd been like, yeah, I think I could vote for DeSantis. He's gotten way too deep in the culture wars. I think you have to leave the culture wars to Trump because he's got like the market cornered on that already. And I just think DeSantis is far better spoken. He can talk about issues with ease, both domestically and international policy. I just think he's more intelligent.
There's less to attack.
There's less to attack.
If he stays chill right now.
Right.
Like right now is what they're attacking, is what he says yesterday or what he said 2 weeks ago. That's what they're attacking. They have nothing, 3 or 5 years ago really to go off of. So they're only attacking what he's doing right now. So just chill.
Just chill. Buddy. Yeah, I'd like to see him just focus on, I mean, I don't mind some culture wars. There are some fights that I think are worth fighting. Mm-hmm. But I think he takes it too far because he's trying to amp up a base that I think already kind of belongs to Donald Trump. And so I don't know. I don't know with DeSantis. And he could, if he played his cards right, one of the benefits to DeSantis is he can serve 8 years. Trump cannot. Mm-hmm. And so that for Republicans, I think I see a lot of value in that. Mm-hmm. And he's younger, et cetera, but he's just, I don't know, he's floundering a little bit. And his weird LGBTQ ad, like anti-Trump ad, it was like a self-inflicted wound.
If this doesn't work out for us, we're definitely doing campaign advisement.
Seriously, more and more lately, I'm like, oh my God, we need to be campaign consultants because we see these things, like the Hillary Franz thing. Hillary, who are you trying to be? Are you trying to be Bob Ferguson? Because Bob is being Bob. And he's already got all those voters. Mm-hmm. You have so many awesome things you can run on as a Democrat who actually knows the other side of the state exists, and you're leaning into the lazy Trump comparisons and right-wing fear-mongering. I'd be like, man, okay, that's our backup plan. Okay. If the podcast fails, we're going to advise political campaigns, but only the ones we really believe in. Maybe when our looks finally go, which is going to be many years from now. And we can't do this anymore because people are like, I don't want to look at them. Then we'll go do that, okay? When we get too tired. If your eye never heals. All right. Story number 3 outside of Washington State. We had to do a follow-up on this. We were going to do it yesterday. We ran out of time. Ben and Jerry. So we talked on the show last week, I think, about how Ben and Jerry's on the 4th of July comes out with this woke statement about how it's time to give back land to Native Americans. They have this whole write-up on how they want to start with with Mount Rushmore. and give this whole historical perspective of why Mount Rushmore should be given back to Native Americans, and I'm sure they'd like blow it up or something. But our point was, okay, you first. With all these people who want to do the land acknowledgements, right? It's like, all right, you want to talk about like the city of Seattle, they start all their meetings, oh, we're on stolen Salish land. It's like, okay, give it back then. No one's stopping you from giving it back. So Ben and Jerry's, no one's stopping you from giving land back where you own it, where you have stores, etc. But no, of course, they're like, let's do Mount Rushmore. So anyway, a Vermont Native American chief is calling Ben and Jerry's on their bullshit, saying that Ben and Jerry's headquarters in Vermont is on stolen land. Shock of the century. And that they are now urging Ben and Jerry's. It's Don Stevens. He's the chief of the Nulhagen Band of Kusuk Abenaki Nation. Why did I even try to read that? Why did I even try? Told the New York Post, he quotes, looks forward to any kind of correspondence with the brand to see how they can better benefit Indigenous people. Noting that the company's South Burlington, Vermont headquarters is on their land that was originally inhabited by the tribe. So to me, this was, of course, going to happen. And Ben and Jerry's should have seen this coming. Now, if Ben and Jerry's wants to really put their money where their mouth is, maybe Ben and Jerry's will say, yes, we're gonna give this land back to you, and then we're gonna lease it from you. We're gonna keep our headquarters there, but will you sign like a lifelong lease for us or something like that? Even that would be more genuine than what they're doing now. And I should note, Nicole, are we going to play that interview this Sunday on Sundays with Subscribers? I think so. I think that's the plan. So,
I believe so.
Nicole and I last week, we did this story. And I was like, is there one example of someone virtue signaling and then actually giving stolen land back? It turns out there is. And we are going to have a guest on the show on Sundays with Subscribers this week who is going to talk to us about instances where that has happened, and also as a Native American, respond to some of these virtue signaling we're on stolen land claims when they don't actually then give stolen land back. So I think it's going to be a fascinating interview. I'm very excited about it. But because I was very curious, like, how do Native Americans feel about that? When you have people like, we're on stolen land, but then they don't do anything about it. Right. Because I have to imagine that would just be angering for them.
I mean,
so we're going to find out in this interview.
Again, maybe not angering, but
annoying.
Just annoying, yeah.
Tiring.
Because again, you're a victim. And let's remind you of your victimhood.
Yes. So I'm going to ask an actual Native American what they think about this, as opposed to me, Whitey, commenting what I think about the virtue signaling, stolen land stuff. We're going to on Sundays with Subscribers. So if you're not a subscriber, now's a good chance. undividedpod.com, undividedpod.com. We have great conversations on the Sunday show. Okay, coming up next, questions, comments from the stream today. But first, we've been talking about Eastside Weight Loss Clinic. I am down 36 pounds on the program, feeling great. Really looking forward to a summer where I don't look like I did during the pandemic, because it just says you don't feel good. And then you look back at pictures, you're like, oh man, why didn't I do something about that sooner? So I've heard from so many of you who have started the Eastside Weight Loss Clinic plan and are doing great. At every meet and greet we did over the past couple weeks, I met at least one person at each one who had taken the Eastside Weight Loss Clinic program and had fantastic results. So I love hearing those stories. If you've been thinking about it, it just takes 15 minutes to figure out whether the program is right for you, and you can do it virtually. Go to eastsideweightlossclinic.com, eastsideweightlossclinic.com, schedule a free 15-minute consultation with Dr. Ryan Coogan and his team, and be on your way to a better you in no time at all. Okay, we'll get to questions and comments from the stream today. On the governor's race, Two Ladies Midwest Adventures says, Brandi, can we keep encouraging them to keep things real and bridge build for our future? How can we help keep them honest and build more bridges? I think when you see an example, even if it's a candidate you like, of obvious fear-mongering, of obvious gaslighting, where they are painting the worst possible picture of someone by taking something they said or did out of context, I think you send them a message. All the campaigns have websites, they have email addresses, and you let them know why it bothers you. And I mean, that's all we can do, right? We can just demand better of especially the people we support. And like I said with the the whole, oh, he voted with Trump 92.5% of the time. I also called out a Republican candidate just in the 2020 cycle or 2022 cycle for making similar comparisons when it comes to Democrats. I just don't think it's sincere or genuine. So I think all we can do is ask better of them. Like I said, I like Hillary Franz as a person. I've known her for years, and hearing that doesn't even sound like her. That's like not even the person I know. And so I think that just saying something when it bothers you is a good start. All right, Shauna said, my friend has been working for the Attorney General's office for 20 years. She cannot wait for Ferguson to go. Things drastically diminished once he took office, and she can't stand him or what he's done to the AGO's office. Interesting. John said, I've always liked Dave. I like Hillary also, and I'm also very disappointed in her. I didn't think she would go that low. Shame on you. Yeah, I hope she has a little about face, because there's a lot of Republicans who respect her in Eastern Washington. And I just see her disappointing them a little bit with some of these comments. Rachel said, Mark Mullet, a moderate. He voted yes on every horrible bill the last 2 sessions. Not every horrible bill, but some of them. We talked about them in the interview we'll post. We dive into them quite a bit. He voted to ban assault weapons, quote unquote. He voted for 5599. The shelter bill for transgender youth. In fact, there's this really great moment in our interview. So I'm sitting here with Mark Mullet, and he knows that I'm collecting signatures for Referendum 101 to overturn a bill he supported. So I had a copy of R101, and I asked him to sign it to give the people the choice to keep it. So you'll have to watch the interview to see what he said or did. So, all right. Sergeant Pickles' primary voter pamphlet came in yesterday. Took your advice, Brandi, and used it to start a fire pit. Good. Love it. Yep. Just keep that. That's actually better than recycling it. Well, recycling it's fine, but yeah, it was for your fire. Start a fire. Mm-hmm. Great. I'm sure there are some candidates who hate that I say that because they spend so much money on those mailers. Maybe if you didn't send out disingenuous mailers, I wouldn't tell people to throw them away in the recycling. It's ridiculous. Mm-hmm. Okay. It's like they think we're stupid. That's the thing that really bothers me. On our segment, Unbelievable, which had the transgender woman who says, oh, I don't like that my name is out there and I want to change public disclosure laws, even though I'm actively seeking attention all the time and now I'm on the news. Lieutenant Dan said, sounds like this trans person is a massive narcissist who regrets all the attention they drew to themselves. And I would feel much differently, by the way, if this was a person who had actually attempted to go in the spa as a transgender woman, was denied, quietly filed a complaint with the commission, and then didn't ask for any attention publicly, and then someone dug up the complaint, blasted them out. I'd feel so much differently about it, but that's not the situation that we're in right now. Robert Parker says, screw that anonymous complaint idea. If you're going to use government as your political weapon, then you should not be able to hide behind the government skirt. I agree and I disagree. I mean, I get it. If you're attacking a business and you want to force a business, a private enterprise to do something using the government as a tool, I do get the argument that your name shouldn't be shielded. But I worry about true egregious instances of discrimination, on the basis of race or gender or sexual orientation, and someone has a legitimate reason to complain with the state and to get things changed, and then that person is subjected to hate and vitriol and threats. There has to be some way to be able to do both, to have some level of transparency, but protect these people who have legitimate complaints from hate and vitriol. I don't know what the answer is. I do have some sympathy in that regard. Ladies Midwest Adventure says, can you bring back your boop?
Oh, I put that in there because yesterday you didn't do it, and
on Unbelievable?
There was 15
on Unbelievable?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, can you play the Unbelievable open again?
Oh, sure.
Okay, just for you. Boop.
There you go.
I'll never miss it again. On Portland, Bob Larson says multnomah. You had it right the first time. Okay, just as it's spelled. Sometimes it's just as it's spelled, and other times it's not. Multnomah. Find the Right Passion on YouTube. Oh, that's an interesting.
I know. I thought that.
Is that a business name? If so, is it appropriate?
I think it's Find the Right.
Find the Right Passion.
Right.
Says they are not building treatment centers. There's the issue. Well, yeah, you have to have treatment centers, but you also have to have people willing to go into treatment centers. And that's why, for instance, I advocate for arrests sometimes for people who are addicted to drugs and using drugs out in the open. Because if nothing's working and they're not taking access to services because they are not in their right mind when they're on these substances, sometimes, maybe a detox on a jail cell is going to be just the thing to get them in a better state of mind. That's also why I advocate for sweeps. When you let a tent city or an RV sit somewhere for 3 months, no big deal, 4 months, a year, and you get these big, massive encampments, and they're comfortable. They're like, oh, we can be on this property and be in a tent and be using drugs and be festering this environment that's not safe. I think when you come in and you're routinely doing sweeps, moving them from place to place while offering services before those sweeps happen, you're giving them ample opportunity to connect to services, and you're also saying this way of life is not going to be acceptable here. And so it's more of an initiative for them to say, okay, well, I'm going to take services this time because I'm really sick of having to move my tent every week. On Trump, Debbie says, don't kid yourself, Nicole. I moved to the heartland and there are Trump signs everywhere. Yeah, and we do get in our bubbles, right? In Washington state, Trump's not popular. Bottom line, I mean, there are obviously some people who support him, but I think at last check, his approval rating was like 30%, somewhere around there. Not very high. And so, there are absolutely Trump support. And we get in these weird areas where it's like, here, we're like, well, people don't like Trump and he's a death knell for our candidates. But in other states, that's not the case.
Right. I know. I guess it's not only this bubble, but media bubble, all of that seems to really have abandoned him, even the ones that used to like him, because he's turned on them. And and so I think it's just that. And it surprises me. I mean, Trump was good to me. I've defended him in some cases because of him being good to me. Yeah. But right now, it's just not what we need, right? We need somebody that can kind of unite everybody. And this is, I mean, it is ugly in this country right now.
And the issue with DeSantis is he's not being that person either.
I know.
He's trying to be too much like Trump. But Trump already is Trump and he has his supporters. Right. So DeSantis isn't going to siphon off a meaningful number of the supporters. And he's not giving people an alternative that's different enough from Trump for them to abscond and say, let's support him.
That's why we're disappointed, right? And I'm not saying the other side is being any more uniting. They're not. They're not helping at all.
Yeah.
But,
of course not.
But so it's just surprising to me sometimes that we haven't, I mean, it's just getting crazy.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
We just need fresh blood everywhere. You know what I mean?
You're illegal to run now.
Clean slate. Oh, I am legal to run. I'm 35. Let's do it. Let me see. Just to be clear, in case I'm going to run afoul of any PDC things, I'm not running for president. Okay, great. Angela says, I'm a refugee from the state of Washington, now living in the free state of Tennessee. Oh.
I love Tennessee.
What's the biggest? Nashville?
Yes.
I haven't been there. I'd love to go.
Memphis as well.
I've never been. I don't think I've ever been to Tennessee.
You haven't been to Nashville yet? Oh,
no.
I will take you.
Oh, okay. Let's go.
Yeah, let's
after the show today. I'm in.
I might have taken you there for your bachelorette party had I known that. I don't know that I knew you hadn't been
It's not such a long flight.
Yeah.
Matthew says, DeSantis is best when he is calling out the media and pointing out their bias agenda. And I think he's been good at some of that. I'm not saying he has to totally break free from the culture wars, but like DeSantis, I think, was the alternative for people who liked, like you, who liked Trump's policies but didn't like his personality, which I think that's a legitimate, right? I think that's a legitimate care. Like, why do I have to vote for someone for president who I don't like personally and wouldn't want to sit down for a beer with?
Right.
Wouldn't want to invite over to my house. And so DeSantis was, I think, that option where it's like, man, I can get the same policies. Someone younger, someone who doesn't have all the baggage, someone who can serve 8 years, but doesn't have all the bullshit that comes with Trump. But now he's like, oh, let me just dive right in the bullshit pond. And it's like, okay, chill out. Yeah, chill. Robert says, it's not stolen land, it's conquered territory. Tell that to the Native Americans. Okay. All right. Great comments today, guys. Per the usual. I usually end with my sanity check. I didn't have a good one today. Is there any?
Well, that's your sanity check. Chill, DeSantis.
Chill, Ron DeSantis. I was like getting ready for the show. I was like, I have nothing that I'm super passionate about for my closing sanity check today.
Sanity check.
DeSantis?
Yeah.
Chill, Ron DeSantis. And that has been your sanity check for today. We're over time anyway. Yeah. We're over time anyway. Chill, Ron DeSantis. Okay, that has been it for today's episode of Undivided. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your commitment to giving common sense a comeback. If you have not become a subscriber to the show already, please do so. This is how we continue our mission and our movement to give common sense a comeback and to chill, sanity, truth, honesty, transparency, all of those things. We will see you back here on the live show tomorrow at noon.